Star Wars Outlaws released in early access this week, and I've been playing a ton of it, with one big question on my mind. Is Star Wars Outlaws just another Ubisoft open world? Not really. But kinda? It's complicated. To properly answer this question, I've divided this video up into 3 parts. Number 1, we're going to talk about 5 reasons why I think Star Wars Outlaws isn't just another Ubisoft open world. Then we'll talk about a couple of reasons why it kinda is, and then we'll put that all together and help you decide whether you should play it. Hey everybody, I'm Dylan. Welcome to Beep Boop Loot, where my goal is to help you make the most of your game time. Let's get started with the first reason why Star Wars Outlaws isn't just another Ubisoft open world game. So starting off with story, Star Wars Outlaws has genuinely surprised me with how great the story is. And this all starts with Kay and Nix. They're an awesome pair of characters to play as. I love their relationship, and even though Nix doesn't speak because he's an animal, it's very obvious these two have a real fondness for each other. And then there's Kay, who's very likable, but also a bit of a scoundrel. She's kind of an anti-hero, and she fits right in the Star Wars universe. Don't get me wrong, Ubisoft has created some great characters in the past. Voss, Pagan Min, Cassandra from Assassin's Creed Odyssey, but I think Kay really stands out as one of the better Ubisoft protagonists in recent memory. That's particularly important in a game where you have no character customization other than dressing them up in different outfits. You've got to be able to get behind the main character, and Outlaws really succeeds here. I'm also admittedly a really big fan of outlaw heist kind of stories, and this absolutely delivers there. So from a subjective quality standpoint, this game definitely gets some bonus points. So yeah, I typically expect a serviceable and sometimes not so serviceable story from Ubisoft that's really just an excuse to clear a map, clear outposts just to fight a bigger boss. But Outlaws really turns this on its head, prioritizing a cinematic, engaging story first, rather than just an excuse to go clear outposts. Which also leads me to reason number 2. Far Cry and Assassin's Creed, but Far Cry in particular, feel a bit like a map clearing simulator. Go to this region, liberate it, then fight the main boss, rinse and repeat. Not the case for Star Wars. Outlaws takes you all over the open world, but it's centered around stealing things from different factions, making decisions that improve or hurt your relationships with the factions. We'll get to factions more in a minute, by the way. And then everything usually goes to crap and you have to fight your way out or sneak your way out, run your way out. It's very cinematic and there's always different little spins on that. Technically, you are going from camp to camp, but the difference here is it's very stealth focused in a way that is different than like the Far Cry or Assassin's Creed formula. There's definitely a subjective quality to this, but the fact that you're not some overpowered superhero really adds variety to the encounters and makes them less repetitive. You can't just mow a bunch of guys down with your blaster, you have to think a little bit more tactically. And I haven't even mentioned progression. There are no levels in this game. Huh? Instead, you seek out experts across the galaxy, and when you find them, you get access to an expert-specific skill tree. Each skill on that tree is unlocked by doing certain things in the world. Get a certain number of kills, spend a certain number of credits. There's all kinds of objectives, and once you've completed all the objectives for a skill, you can unlock it. So to me, this sounded really cool on paper, but it's actually excellent in practice too. Every skill you unlock feels like you're actually training with a mentor and progressing your skills as Kay. You get to decide how to progress. You get to focus on whatever skill upgrades you want, and you often have to complete objectives that are related to that skill. So yeah, there's no real map clearing objectives, and there's no experience bar either, which feels like a pretty significant departure from other Ubisoft games. So Ubisoft's pretty good at creating beautiful open worlds to explore. Look no further than some of the recent Assassin's Creed games. Yeah, they can feel a bit bloated, but it does really feel like you've been transported to the time period of these games. Star Wars Outlaws really doubles down on this, and one of the standout features of this game is the brilliant Star Wars world. It actually gives me a lot of the same vibes as the recent Avatar game, which should come as no surprise because Massive were the developers for both games. What sets the Star Wars world apart is the existing IP. For some people, this will be worth the admission alone. If all you've ever wanted is to experience the world of Star Wars from the perspective of a nobody smuggler, this game basically nails that. I love walking through the main cities, listening to people gossip about the state of the world, and then picking up valuable intel from eavesdropping.
Both know Tashara was better off without the Empire.
Oh, you mean lawless and dangerous? A little order was exactly what this place needed.
I also really appreciated the main city maps, particularly for the first city, Miragana, on Tashara. That's the first planet you explore. It took me about 6 hours to complete all the quests on Tashara, but I kept coming back to Miragana throughout the quest line, and I kept finding new pathways and different ways the city interconnected itself. It's really clear from playing this that the world itself was not created lazily. There was a lot of thought and love and passion put towards this. It's easy to feel cynical, especially with a licensed IP like Star Wars, but I'm so happy to report that one of the things that really distinguishes Star Wars Outlaws is its world and the love and attention to detail that's brought to it. Okay, so reason number 4 is an entire system in Star Wars Outlaws that I think significantly changes the way you play through the open world. The factions in Star Wars Outlaws are a significant part of playing the game, and they're not just quest givers. Every decision you make has consequences to your relationships with all of the different factions. So it's a real balancing act as you navigate the main quest and side jobs, contracts, things like that. This isn't necessarily obvious right away, but the game's set up to force you to make hard decisions, and there are many instances where you're surprised with an additional twist to the current mission, and that can make big changes to your rep with each faction. I love this system so much, and it's surprisingly more detailed than I would have expected. It gives you a reason to care about the world and feel more immersed in it, doing the things that a scoundrel actually does, double-crossing people or staying loyal to the people who hired you. And then that completely changes the way you approach different missions depending on your relationships with the factions. I loved having the option of grinding a few side contracts to allow me an easier time getting in somewhere I needed to go for a main quest. So as an example, you might have a quest where you need to go into the Pike territory and steal something valuable. If you have high reputation with them, you can just waltz right in. There are still parts that are restricted no matter what, but it will be a lot easier because of that high reputation with them to get to where you need to go. That immersion, and maybe it's a little heavy of a term, but emergent storytelling that comes out of your relationships with the different factions is so cool and just adds a new, clever twist to the Ubisoft open world formula. So reason number 5 that this is not like any other Ubisoft open world has everything to do with missions and exploration. So typically, I'm used to open worlds having a hub where you go to see NPCs with big markers over their heads, you complete whatever tasks they have for you, and get rewards and XP. Star Wars Outlaws takes a slightly different approach. Instead of running around to specific quest markers, although there still are some of those in the game, you discover intel in the world, either by picking it up, listening in on someone's conversation, or talking directly to someone in the world. This feels way more immersive, like all of your quests are little mysteries you're trying to solve, and at the end of them you either find cool new gear, or valuables, or you just unlock a new expert maybe. You will find eventually your quest log looks like any other open world game, bloated with all kinds of stuff to do, but the central mechanic of unraveling these leads at least feels more engaging than just a waypoint on your map for you to check off. And I will say too, part of an open world game is getting into a bloated quest log. That's just kind of how they're designed. Yes, there are examples that don't do that, but for the most part, an open world game will have a huge quest log and you have to choose what you want to do next. I think Massive has done a good job with the problem statement here of making that as engaging as possible. And just the fact that most NPCs are very unassuming, there's just this tiny, inconspicuous white dot that lets you know you are able to interact with them, and anything could happen at that point. You have no idea what they're going to say, what they're going to give you. You could find new intel that's related to something you're already chasing, or a brand new quest to start. Overall, Star Wars does a really solid job of managing that open world bloat and creating a more interesting, engaging system to manage your quests and exploration. And now is probably a good time to mention that if you're enjoying this video and want to see more content like this, you already know the rest. I love you. So those are the main reasons why Star Wars Outlaws is not just another Ubisoft open world, but let's talk about a couple of reasons why it still kinda is. So the first reason we've already kinda talked about. While I love the way that you discover new quests and side content, it still ultimately starts to feel like a checklist when your quest log is overloaded with stuff to do. Again, I'm not really sure what the solution to this is, and I think Massive has done a great job managing this as best as possible, but if you get overwhelmed by huge backlogs of quests, you're still gonna run into that problem in Star Wars Outlaws. And reason number 2 is traversal. I really like the speeder bike in this game. It's super fun to hop on the first time, but it eventually does just feel like a horse in any other game. Boosting and jumping are great upgrades, but I did find myself checking out from traversal across the open world. I just wish moving across the maps was a bit more engaging, maybe with more speeder bike chases. That's one thing noticeably missing from this game. You can't even shoot off of your speeder bike. Sometimes you do get chased by other people shooting you, and that feels awesome, by the way, but it's a very strange choice to not allow you to shoot on your bike. And by the way, this isn't a deal breaker for me, but if long, sometimes tedious travel across open worlds is a turnoff for you, Star Wars Outlaws doesn't really do anything to fix that. I also find probably the weakest part in the game is traveling in your ship, surprisingly. It's just kind of boring. I really appreciate that there are open world ship exploration areas, but yeah, it's just boring to engage with in practice. So finally, given all that information, the ultimate question is, should you play Star Wars Outlaws? Should you buy it at full price? Should you wait for a sale? What's right for you? I think you should play Star Wars Outlaws if you're in the mood for a more grounded Star Wars heist story with great characters, a detailed, immersive world, and some genuinely clever twists on the traditional Ubi formula. Factions are a really great addition to the game, giving every encounter some consequence and giving the player some freedom to make quests harder or easier depending on their relationships. But this is still the Ubi DNA for better and for worse, so just keep that in mind. This isn't going to be Game of the Year, but if you're in the mood for a Ubi-style open world with some genuinely fresh ideas, you don't mind a pretty strong reliance on stealth, though you can go guns blazing at certain parts, And if you just love Star Wars, this game is probably going to be a blast for you. On the other hand, you should probably skip if you don't like stealth or you expect stealth to come with a lot of freedom. Importantly, this game isn't Dishonored or Metal Gear Solid as far as stealth sandboxes, so just keep that in mind. It's a simplified, arcadey stealth system, and there is also some gunfighting to be had. It's just not always possible to win a fight with your guns. It's also not a No Man's Sky or Starfield style game. This is much more on the rails, almost like if Uncharted or Tomb Raider went fully open world. It's a cinematic story first, with some beautiful open worlds to explore as well. So don't expect a huge amount of player expression in the game. That doesn't mean it's bad, by the way, just know that you won't get the same fantasy fulfillment as something like, say, No Man's Sky or Starfield. Overall, I think it's a day one purchase for anyone who is super jazzed about all of the cool things I've talked about in this video, but if all of the positives in this video have still kind of left you on the fence, I would totally wait for a sale first. For me, I've been pleasantly surprised with Star Wars Outlaws. Especially as a big fan of Starfield and No Man's Sky, I was skeptical of another Ubisoft open world game with the Star Wars paint job, but I'm having so much fun with this game. It's better, but also very different from what I expected. And it's obviously not for everyone, but it's a solid game that's worth a consideration for all the reasons I've outlined in this video. But what do you think of Star Wars Outlaws? Will you be picking it up this weekend? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more space games to consider, check out this video right here where we pit No Man's Sky versus Starfield in the ultimate space game showdown. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Dylan. This is Beep Boop Loot. I'll see you in the next one.